Greetings, Writing Art Criticism students. I hope this finds you well. Welcome to week 3, and we are moving along on our 8-week journey through the history and development of modern art criticism, a particular way of writing about works of art. I want also for you to be thinking about even thinking about the bigger picture given, and as I had given at the beginning of the class regarding art criticism isn't just about reviewing art, um focusing on its quality, whether it's good or bad, providing consumer guides, even interpreting art. That all of that takes place within the broader context of um, what can we say about a work of art, and what can we responsibly say about a work of art, and is it possible to bear false witness against a work of art, to to distort it in ways that violate its intentions or violate its integrity as an art object, um, in terms of what art is supposed to do. And oftentimes we get caught in the presumption that art is just another way of sending messages. It's another way of communicating what I think about the world, or what I know to be true about the world, or sending slogans and signs amongst the world. And that's what social media is. That's what our vast majority of our world of communication through language and vision. But the arts do something else, and they get in the nooks and crannies, and it's complex, and the arts, whatever genre, deal in the realm of emotion and feeling and experience, and those aspects of knowledge about the world that can't be boiled down to declarative truth statements, or formulated in algebraic equations, or um, yield a simple yes or no response, or can be reduced to 6 words or 140 characters, or however you want to define the sound bite. And given that fact, artworks are always going to be misunderstood. There's always going to be misinterpretation and misunderstanding. They're going to be used against their will to perform functions that they weren't intended to perform. And so part of what we as thinkers and writers about art are intended to do, whether we do it as art historians or aestheticians or art critics or um, uh, curators, is to slow that process down and to allow the work of art to breathe, and to allow it to do what it was intended to do, and to restore its integrity as an artifact that unfolds a richness of experience, which means that the work of art is going to be interpreted in different ways. So I wanted to emphasize that to you, um, and to remind you of that. This week, what we're looking at is art criticism as a unique product of modernity. And so, what is characteristic of the modern world? What is characteristic of the world after the Enlightenment? Is that it is not so easy and wise to simply take tradition for granted, to take tradition at its word. That wisdom is more than just what is passed down um, by your ancestors. That you need to submit all forms of knowledge to critique, and that is the Enlightenment exercise of reason. You don't simply take for granted what the church fathers 1,000 years ago said about this doctrine or that doctrine. You subject it to criticism. You're subjected to critique. And so critique, the exercise of reason in creative ways, is an important part of the modern project. And an important part of the modern project is to make the world better. If the view in the context of the post-Enlightenment world, in the modern world, moving increasingly into the 17th and 18th century, if the world is not simply the way it is simply because God sovereignly determined it to be that way, then we have responsibility, and our responsibility is much greater than our pre-modern forefathers and foremothers believed. That if there are poor in the world, our goal is not simply to give alms to them during Lenten season, but to eliminate poverty. If there is sickness in the world, we don't simply pray that God lifts the hands of sickness from those around us, but that we find ways to fight disease. And so part of the role of criticism in the modern world is broadly cultural criticism. It's social criticism. It's political criticism. It's the critique of authority. It's the critique of tradition. It's the critique of church and state. The critique of authority that can be abused. It is the attempt to make the world better, and that we have a tremendous responsibility to make the world better. Now, that responsibility is to varying degrees. There are atheists that would say that the only way that we can make things better is by taking full responsibility for it. And then there are those with various forms of traditional Christian belief, for example, who would say that we have more responsibility than perhaps our medieval ancestors did. That instead of relying on praying for and relying on miracles, we can work to make our communities more sanitary so that there aren't diseases spread by rats and other vermin. And so that's part of the modern project, and criticism plays an important role in that. And so the exercise of reason through writing is an important developing, you could say, literary genre. And so many of the examples of the writings that I've provided for you this week are examples of criticism as cultural criticism. Writing that focuses not on the interpretation of works of art per se, but on the interpretation of culture and how culture manifests and embodies, expresses, are indicators into how we live in our social communities. So the culture, the symbolic expression of form, or the symbolic expression of belief, is an indicator of broader, deeper social and political concerns. And so what you will see will be cultural critics who are critiquing culture, who are attempting to remove falsehood and myth for the free exercise of reason, for the purpose of benefiting society, will begin to look to the arts as indicators, as means to that end. And so a number of writing examples that I've provided for you this week are examples of the broader genre of cultural critique, within which many examples of art criticism in the modern period operates within. It doesn't operate within philosophy. don't operate within art history. They operate in this space in which a writer is writing for a broader readership, an interested and concerned broader readership about the state of modern society. The state of modern society predicated upon the capacity for the maximum number of people to be fed and clothed, for the basic needs to be provided for. A modern society in which the economic and political circumstances and social circumstances are such that each human being can exercise their autonomy and their freedom as an individual human being can be expressed in the most clear way. And how that expression of freedom interacts with other expressions of freedom. And certain forms of art in the modern period will be seen as regarded, interpreted as ways of pointing, as ways of exemplifying this, or as a way of critiquing aspects of culture that need to be transformed. So that art itself made in the modern period into the 19th and into the 20th century isn't art just to sit on a pedestal or to hang on a nail in a museum, but it's intended to participate in, to shape, to transform communities, to make the world better in some way, to point out injustice and to point a way towards justice. And so part of criticism, art criticism in this broader cultural context, will be for the writer to point out those aspects of the work of art that's doing that. That's a response to injustice and pointing towards the possibility of redemption or hope or reconciliation. And perhaps the way that an art and the value of a work of art in this period can be understood is what is the value, the capacity of that work of art to respond to the present moment, the present unjust moment, unfree moment, in order to point towards the possibility of a free future, of a redemptive future, of a hopeful future, and one that resists the temptation of just, quote unquote, laying up treasures in heaven, operating as Marx wrote about how religion operates, as an opiate. It's a necessary means to soften the sharp edges of a really hard life in which one is always a little hungry, don't quite have enough food, working way too hard, don't feel like they fit in the world, but that somehow and in some way a redemption, that when I die, leave this unjust world, that there will be justice for me in the future. That kind of religious faith, what some would call excesses of which would be a shirking of present responsibility, is not what modern art is intended to focus on. To focus on the attempt that somehow and in some way here, there may be potential to alleviate some aspect of suffering. And how can the arts alleviate some aspect of that suffering? More than just providing a certain kind of aesthetic narcotic, that after a tough day of work in the week, we go to the museum and we heal on a Sunday afternoon going to the museum. But is there something that the work of art does, that the arts can do, that will motivate us to do good, to love our neighbor, to work to eliminate suffering in any possible way that we have the potential. That is the tone that much of modern criticism is trying to strike. You guys have your art criticism writing exercise that's due this Sunday night, November 11th. It's an exercise just to emphasize to you how hard writing art criticism is. That as a writer who is writing for an audience, you are largely free to write what you want. And how do you compel the interest of an audience? Why should I, as a reader, care about what you have to say? And the difficulty of finding a voice, and a voice that is attractive to readers, is a significant challenge in writing art criticism. Why do it? Why do it when you don't have to do it? You make a little bit of money, but those are just bits and pieces. A little check here and there. It's not supporting your family. So why do it? So those are the questions I want to explore in more depth after you've had this exercise and experienced the difficulty of writing. That this isn't an art history assignment. This is you writing for a readership, communicating to that readership why it's important to take that exhibition or that work of art seriously. And how do you take it seriously? So I hope these thoughts were helpful to you. I wish you a great week number 3. I wish you a good week at work and with your other responsibilities. I am hoping to be able to catch up this week on your discussion prompt responses, and I am chomping at the bit to get to them. Again, write me if you have any questions, and I look forward to hearing from you. Take care.